Hello and welcome to part 5.1 in the video series where I am in search of my top 5 decks that I received in 2023. We are nearing the end. We have 3 videos left. In this video, I'll be covering decks over $50. There'll be 2 parts to part 5. And if you're interested in the decks I'm going to cover in this video, head in the description box. I'll put links to show you which ones I am going to cover. I'm about to show the ranking so far. So if you are new here and this is the first video you're watching, head back to video 1.1 where I show my rating scale, my rating criteria, and you can follow along from the beginning. So here is our top 10 list so far, and let's see if anybody can beat those top 5 decks. And if you are wondering where Cozy Witch was, because I know some of you have been following Cozy Witch's unfortunate downfall in the list, it is sitting at number 11, just below the top 10, which is a pretty healthy score. And I really consider anything that's sitting kind of in the top 20 to be kind of top decks. But let's see what ends up in the top 5. What is the top deck? Is there going to be any shakeups during this video? And I suspect maybe there will be. Let's get started. And the first deck we're going to start with is Soul Cards. This is a deck that I saw someone post on Instagram, and it just turned out that the creator was having a sale on their website at the time. So I got this deck for $33. The current price is $55. This creator is really setting the tone with these decks. She has identical decks all in different colorways, which completely changes the feel. The one we're looking at right now is Green Dream. It's also available in blush pink, midnight black, white dahlia. There's a lavender luck, and she also does journals. And this deck is like a mood. Like, the cards are this really, really unique kind of green, like dirty green almost. There's a cannabis plant on the back, but it's not cannabis themed like some decks that have come out this year and last year. So we've got our kind of matte gold gilding on the sides. Let's have a look at card usability. It's a rose petal finish on the deck. So let's see how it shuffles. So it shuffles really well. It's a little stiff and just a little bit sharp. But they do push together fairly well, considering it's a rose petal finish. So I am going to give this one the smiling face and a score of 63 for card usability. So for versatility, because it's quite minimalist in style, it does make it quite versatile. It could be used like with many other types of decks and in many readings. So I feel like although it's not going to kind of carry its own, like as far as providing that depth itself, there's no guidebook with this. You're really going to be using your own feelings on the cards rather than kind of a guidebook leading you down that path. But as far as versatility, I think it would pair fairly well with many, many things just because of its style. So I'm going to give it the smiling face for versatility and a score of 60. So for energy and personal connection, I feel like I did make a connection with this deck. It reminds me in a weird way of my childhood, like this kind of late 70s vibe where the 60s were still kind of hanging out and my house had not been renovated yet. So we were shag carpeting throughout, mirrored ceilings. My house carried the 1970s well into the 80s and perhaps the 90s. And this deck really reminds me of that time, like, you know, the show Mad Men, like later in the series when they were like going into the 60s with that burnt orange. So for energy, because it brings me to that place, the personal connection and the energy for me is pretty high on this deck. So I'm going to give it that smiling face as well for energy and personal connection and a score of 62. So as far as readability, it doesn't have a guidebook, and the gold kind of lettering and stamping, sometimes when it hits the light a little bit just right, you can't quite see the title and kind of have to move the card. So physical readability, although not challenging, it's not as easy as some of the other decks that we've seen. And that might vary with this particular deck depending on which colorway you're looking at. But for this one, for readability, I'm going to have to give it a very low neutral face. So I'm going to give it a score of 39. So for uniqueness, I have a few other decks, and there's one also that's going to be in this video that is a very, very similar to this, kind of very minimalist, just in a different colorway. I suppose you have to look very closely to find its uniqueness, because it does kind of read like this style of deck. So for uniqueness, I think I'm going to give it the unamused face. Because there are a lot of other decks. And I think if this was kind of missing in my collection, I don't know that I would really mind too much or feel a need to replace it. So for uniqueness, I am going to give it the unamused face and a score of 25. That is going to give these soul cards a total of 249 points and put it at 61 on the list so far. The next deck on the list is the Pocket of Vines Tarot. It comes in this tuck box. I got this back in April for $55. That is its current price. Here are the backs. It was rumored to be out of print or out of print for a while, but it is currently available. Let's have a look at the cards for card usability. There are the backs. The corners are a little bit straighter than I normally like. And the cards feel a little bit longer than standard tarot size, but not much. The cards are a little bit stiffer than you might expect, just kind of looking at the deck. But it's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's very close to being a really nice shuffle, but it's not quite there. There's just a little bit more stiffness in the shuffle than some of the ones that are really nice to shuffle. Hand over hand is really nice though, but my hands are pretty big. If your hands are a little bit smaller, this stretch on either side might be a little bit uncomfortable. So for card usability, I'm going to give this one the neutral face and a score of 53. So for versatility, this deck reads really well. And as far as versatility, I tend to use it just kind of on its own. And I did write on the numbers on the cards because they're missing that. This deck is a particular style, you know, it's a little unusual. I would say modern, although it has kind of like a vintage color to it. So as far as versatility, I don't see it like working super well with others, or being that easy to pair with many oracles. So for versatility, I am going to give it not the unamused face. I'm just going to give it a low neutral face score of 40. For energy and personal connection, I feel like the energy of this deck again is pretty neutral, and my connection to it is as well. Nothing kind of incredible that I've kind of had with working with this deck, but I do enjoy it, and I'm glad to have it in my collection. But for energy and personal connection, it's going to get the neutral face and a score of 50. So readability for this one is pretty interesting because on the one hand, we have these really nice keywords on the bottom, really clear font, which makes it easy to read in that way. But we have at the same time, we have the change of names in the courts. We have change of suit names. There's no numbers in the majors. So it's difficult in that way. I think right out of the box, it's not that easy to read, even though you do have these keywords. So unless you're using it as an oracle, like this one is the storm, and it's actually the moon, which it could be the tower quite easily. And that kind of causes some confusion, and there's only a PDF guidebook. So I'm going to give it the unamused face for readability and a score of 25. So as far as uniqueness, this one is pretty unique. It's going out in its own direction with the keywords, with the change of names, with the change of suits, with the major, like it's kind of making its mark, you know, in its own unique way. So for uniqueness, this one's going to get the party face and a score of 90. That is going to give the Pocket of Vines Tarot a total of 258 points and put it at 58 on the list so far. The next deck on the list is the Whispering Spirits Tarot by Joanna Nelson. I got this back in April from the Kickstarter for her, the Lenormand that she did. And I paid $55, and that is its current price. I've been waiting for this one to come back around because I've been joining Mons Tarot for a while, but I really enjoy this one. So of Joanna Nelson's decks, this is my favorite. But let's have a look at card usability, because my greatest desire for this deck is that it comes in the pocket size, like she's done with the Mons Tarot, because the cards are really big on this one. The shuffle is not bad considering that, but I have pretty big hands and it's a pretty long stretch and I'm not having a good time. But it does shuffle pretty well despite that. So I am going to give this the neutral face for card usability. It comes in a nice magnetic closure box. And we're going to give it the neutral face score and a score of 58. So for versatility, you know, I'm in the mood for this kind of deck. So it's not, you know, on the surface, it's a cute deck and it's going to kind of fit into that, probably not that versatile, but actually in practice, I find I pull this deck out for all sorts of types of readings and all different kinds of moods. It's not just kind of a feel good deck. I think it reads really well just as it is. So for versatility, I'm going to give this one the smiling face and I'm going to give it a score of 74. So for energy and personal connection, this is the Joanna Nelson deck that I have connected with, and I've connected with it on a pretty deep level. I would be pretty upset if this wasn't in my collection. The Mons Tarot just doesn't hit the same way. And I, you know, the connection I have with this deck is very unique. I think the energy is great in this deck. I think the spirits, you know, have such a nice, lovely energy. So I'm going to give it the party face for energy and personal connection, and I'm going to give it a score of 95. So for readability, the titles are really clear because we have the black print on the white background. And the guidebook is fantastic. We get a little message saying what's happening in the cards. So if you're wondering what I'm looking for in that top 5, that's important to me. So that's what's happening here. And then also on top of that in the guidebook, we get a special message from the spirit, the whispering spirit in the card, which I absolutely love. So readability for this one is really, really high, and I'm giving it the party face. And I'm giving it a score of 100 because the guidebook, it's so thin and you wouldn't think, but what she's managed to, and we have to give credit to Trish Sullivan is actually the guidebook writer for this one. What she's managed to do in such a small space and how that affects the readings, the guidebook itself, and the fact that on the cards, like the titles are so clear. So it's not taking you out of the reading, trying to figure out what the card is. You can really just glance at what it is and then really get into the image and see what's going on. So readability is really high. We're going to give it the party face score, and I'm going to give it a score of 100. So for uniqueness, now this deck is not unique in really Joanna Nelson's arsenal because it's similar to the Mons Tarot, and it doesn't give us uniqueness on that level. But I do feel what she's done with these kind of little spirits kind of speaking and in the way that it's done is pretty unique. And so I'm going to give it the smiling face for uniqueness and a score of 78. That gives the Whispering Spirits Tarot a total of 405 points. And we have a tie for 5th place at the moment with the Circe Tarot. The next deck on the list is the Black Salt Tarot. I got this back in October in a Kickstarter when Logan was doing one of the Lenormand decks. I picked up the other Lenormand, I picked up this one. And I hadn't had any of their decks previously. But my friend Krista had been loving this deck. And so I was excited to give it a try. So for card usability, our cards are quite unique because they're almost that low Scarabeo size, a little bit smaller than standard tarot size. They're matte black, and very smooth cardstock. So when we look at card usability, the shuffle is great because of its smaller size. Now, the push together is a little bit stiff, and I think it's because of that matte gilding. So if they had pushed together really smoothly, the actual shuffle for them is like fantastic. So we have kind of a strikeout from I think a party face, and for card usability, we're going to give this the smiling face, and I'm going to give it a score of 75. So for versatility, we have the same situation here as we had with the soul cards, in that it's kind of got this blank canvas, which which makes it almost easy to pair with a lot of different things. So it does have a lot of versatility going for it. And it's pretty unique in kind of its coloring too. So I feel like for versatility, it does pair well with a lot of different things. It can be used in a variety of readings. So I feel like it's going to get the smiling face for versatility, and I'm going to give it a score of 74. So for energy and personal connection, I feel like the energy of this deck is okay. And I haven't made a deep personal connection with it. I feel like I pull it out more for, because I like to look at it, because it's got the kind of the shiny foiling on. But as far as the kind of a special personal connection, I don't know that I would be terribly upset if this wasn't in my collection. I do highly enjoy it, but I don't know that deep personal connection is there. So I'm going to give it the neutral face for energy and personal connection, and a score of 48. So for readability, the font choice and the font size, it's really clear. It's really easy to see what the cards are. It's really easy to tell the difference between the suits. The guidebook is actually fantastic, and it really, really goes towards this deck's usability for sure. So for readability, I'm going to give this the party face and a score of 81. So for uniqueness, there are many decks like this kind of minimalist style with the kind of holographic elements to this, make it feel really unique. Done with the size as well. I feel like for uniqueness, it's going to rate pretty highly, because I don't think there's anything quite doing exactly like this. So I'm going to give it the party face for uniqueness and a score of 91. I'm going to give the Black Salt Tarot a total of 369 points and put it at 14th on the list so far. Next deck on the list is the Zekes Arcana Tarot. I got this back in February for $60. I got it used, I think, and the current price is $65. And these are the backs of the cards. Let's see how it shuffles. It shuffles really nicely. The corners are a teeny bit straighter than I like, but the shuffle is great on this one. A little tiny bit stiffer than I like, but through using it, that will soften up even more and more. So I'm going to give this the party face for card usability, even though it has kind of a large box. I'm going to still give it the party face, and I'm going to give it a score of 85. So for versatility, this deck actually pairs pretty well with a lot of different things. And I think it's the kind of jewel toned color palette that helps it in its versatility. Over the summer, I use this deck a lot, and it does work really well in a variety of readings. There are, in the quartz, the figures kind of feel almost a little bit god or goddess-like. So even in spiritual practice, like this figure here kind of reminds me of Lord Ganesha. And it does have this kind of spiritual element, but also this fun element to it. So for versatility, it really is very versatile deck. So I'm going to give it the party face for versatility, and I'm going to give it a score of 95. So for energy and personal connection, this deck has a really good energy, really fun, really unique energy. I wouldn't call it cozy or comforting in that way, because there are pretty intense elements to it. I did make a really good personal connection with it when I was using it. I was excited to use it. And I think that again is its color palette, and the artwork is very unique. So for energy and personal connection, it's going to get the party face again, and it's going to get a score of 92. So for readability, the titles are very clear. We don't have any name changes in the titles. We have kind of weird Roman numerals, but they aren't that difficult to read. And in the guidebook, there is a lot of kind of more detail in the majors, which is really interesting. I wish the minors had more. It's just kind of one line. But for readability, I still think it deserves the smiling face and a score of 72. So for uniqueness, this deck is really unique. The art style is unique. The feel of it is unique. It's cute, it's fun, but it's also intense and a little weird. So I think uniqueness, we got to get this one the party face, and I'm going to give it a score of 100 for uniqueness. If this wasn't in my collection, there isn't anything that would quite fill its spot. It's kind of all over the place in the best possible way, which makes it stand apart from anything that would try and copy it or do the same thing. So that's why it gets such a high score for uniqueness. That gives the Zekes Arcana Tarot a total score of 444 points and puts it into first place on the list so far. And for those of you angel number friends, I don't know, is 444 a significant number? Let me know. Next deck on the list is the Solera Occulto Tarot. I got this in Kickstarter back in May for $48. And when I was cataloging the decks, this was $60, but since the price has jumped up, so it actually belongs in the decks over $70 video, but I put it in this one, so it's going to stay in this one, but the current price is $97. I don't know what to tell you on that front, but yeah, so I will, and the question is, would I have paid $97 for this deck? And yes, the answer is I probably would have paid that price, but that is the current price of the deck. Let's have a look at card usability. Here are the backs. I have the Crimson Asteria, which is on the same cardstock. It's a big kind of chunky deck. The cards are oracle sized, but despite that, it is pretty easy to shuffle. You kind of have to put a little bit more effort in kind of pushing the cards back together after the shuffle. And it does come included with a stack of oracle cards, which would add that much bulkiness to the deck. Now, I'm shuffling it with them out, and I do keep them separate. So if you added those into the decks, the card usability would go down a little bit more because it would be even more difficult to shuffle. It's not hard, though. It's not the most enjoyable just because they are kind of bigger. It's a little bit chunkier. I'm not wanting to like keep on shuffling. You know, I just want to kind of get the job done and and there we go. So I'm actually going to give it the neutral face for card usability and a score of 54. So for versatility, I think when I use this deck, I generally don't pair it with very much. I don't think it pairs with that many things that well because it's got this kind of, you know, limited color palette. So if you don't get the match kind of quite right, it looks, you know, kind of a little bit off. So I think that, you know, you find pairings to go with this deck, you know, those are the ones that it works with, but it doesn't look great with everything. And as far as different readings, I don't find that it has like enough depth to really use in, you know, really deep readings. So I'm actually going to give it I don't think it deserves an unamused face, but certainly the neutral face for versatility. And I'm going to give it a score of 48. So for energy and personal connection, I think that the energy of this deck is pretty neutral, and I feel like my personal connection to it is as well. I feel happy that I have it in my collection because I do enjoy like looking at it. I like working with it. I think the artwork is fantastic. But I feel like the energy and personal connection is just at the neutral level. I don't feel, you know, like we have this kind of very special relationship together or that the energy is really anything more than neutral. So I'm going to give the neutral face for energy and personal connection and a score of 48. So for readability, the titles are pretty clear, even though they're in cursive. Now, the guidebook does give, you know, a little information on each of the cards, but the font in the guidebook is really small. So it's kind of a struggle to read, although the guidebook is, you know, pretty good. It's just okay though. I mean, it's just okay. I feel like I don't really, you know, feel like if I pull the guidebook, it's really going to give me anything extra with this deck. But for readability, it's fine. It's, you know, it reads pretty much RWS kind of clone. There's not too much going on, you know, that's going to throw anybody off. So I'm going to give it the smiley face for readability, and I'm going to give it a score of 65. So for uniqueness, this deck, you know, this creator's style is very unique. And I enjoy the limited color palette here. But there are a few other decks that do that. And I think that it is similar in some ways to Crimson Asteria. So I don't really think that it's that unique. So I'm going to give it the neutral face for uniqueness, and I'm going to give it a score of 55. That gives the Solara Occulto a total number of 270 points and puts it at 56th on the list so far. The next deck is the Earthchild Tarot. I got this back in June from the creator's website, and I paid $60, and the current price is around $66 US. This is a Canadian creator. And the cards have these holographic silver gilding here on the backs. And let's have a look at card usability. This feels a standard tarot size. A little bit stiff, but really smooth shuffle here. And it comes in a 2-part box. So for card usability, it's a great shuffle. I'm going to give it the smiling face and a score of 90. So for versatility, I got this deck for a specific purpose, and that is to use with the Iris Oracle to do in kind of that more kind of inner child, not so much inner child but work, but more as a voice of the child. And it has served that purpose well. I think it works really well for that. It's got a really unique art style that I think works well for that type of reading. For me, it isn't that versatile. I am pulling it out for readings just for myself. Although I think that if you didn't buy it with that specific purpose in mind, I think that it could be used in general readings quite well. So for versatility, I'm going to give it the smiling face and a score of 65. So for energy and personal connection, I think the energy of this deck is really good. And I have made a personal connection with it. So I am going to give it the smiling face for energy and personal connection and a score of 64. So for readability, the titles are really clear. There's no name changes in the majors or in the courts, and it does come with a little guidebook here. I find at times the guidebook entries a little bit too specific. It kind of goes into, like, if you get this card, this is what might be going on in your life. And it might not come into the reading in that kind of like position. So sometimes reading the guidebook is kind of like disregard what it says. But for readability, it still really is high, and it does come with a guidebook. So I am going to give it the smiling face for readability and a score of 73. So for uniqueness, I think this art style is pretty unique, probably a love it or hate it kind of deck here. And I think that there are a lot of decks that do, that are similar, in this kind of style, but I think this one within those is pretty unique. So I'm going to give it the smiling face for uniqueness and a score of 62. That gives the Earthchild Tarot a total of 354 points and puts it at 22 on the list so far. Next deck on the list is the She-Wolf Tarot. I got this secondhand on eBay for $42. The current price is $60. Here are the backs. The cards are a little bit bigger, more oracle size, similar to the Solara Occulto size, but very different cardstock. This is a smooth cardstock, and it shuffles really well. The cards go together nicely. It is a big handful though, and if your hands are a little bit smaller, I think this would be a bit of a struggle to shuffle. But for card usability, if you can get your hands around and get that ripple shuffle in, it's pretty easy. So I'm going to give it the smiling face for card usability and a score of 73. So for versatility, this is a deck that I hadn't gotten for a long time. I wasn't sure whether it was for me, whether I was perhaps, it was a little too young or modern or stylistically. I don't know. I just didn't know if it was for me. But when I got it, I was not disappointed. I ended up doing, a whole couple month practice kind of with this deck, and the readings were surprisingly deep and brought me in different directions within my spiritual practice. I did not expect that from this deck at all. And I also think that it could be used in general readings. So I think for versatility, it's actually really high for this one. So I'm going to give it the party face for versatility, and I'm going to give it a score of 92. So for energy and personal connection, personally, I connected with this deck on a pretty deep level. And I think its energy is pretty good, pretty neutral. I don't know. And so for energy and personal connection, I have to give it a high score though, because I really wasn't sure, and it really kind of won me over, and it really surprised me in a very positive way. So I'm going to give it the party face for energy and personal connection and a score of 96. So for readability, we do have some name changes in the majors, but it isn't difficult to figure out what card you're looking at. The titles are really clear. I actually kind of enjoy the kind of almost 1970s feel in the font. And so that, and on top of the fact that the guidebook is fantastic. It's, you know, it's the same size as the cards. You know, it's not huge, but the amount you get for each card and the direction it takes the readings for readability with the guidebook is really, really high. So I am actually going to give this a party face for readability, but because of those kind of name changes and it could be a little bit confusing, I'm going to give it the low end party face of score of 80. So for uniqueness, there are, you know, other decks that feel like they do a similar thing or look a similar way. I'm thinking specifically of the Muse Tarot, which I have, but this deck in practice is completely different and reads completely uniquely, even, you know, to its to the other deck by the same creator, the Serpent Fire. I think it's completely different from that, and it manages to be really unique in practice. So I'm going to give it the party face for uniqueness and a score of 95. That is going to give the She-Wolfe Tarot a total of 436 points and give it our second shake up in the top 5 for this video and put it in 3rd place on the list. The next deck on the list is the Ari Tarot. I got this on Taveda's website for $62, and that is the current price. Let's have a look at card usability. Here are the card backs. It's gilded in this kind of really interesting kind of rose gold gilding here. Let's see how it shuffles. It shuffles really well. The cards are a little bit on the thin side, but that actually makes it shuffle better than you would expect for a deck that's this thick, and I really enjoy shuffling it. It's not as good as some of the ones that scored highly, like the Los Scarabeo decks or even the Make Playing cards, but it's still pretty pleasant for its size. So I'm going to give it a party face and a score of 89 for card usability. So if you are a fan of the show Totoro, you probably like this deck. This deck reminds me so much of that show and Saskia, the little girl in the show. It brings that energy for me. For versatility, I really think you could pull it into any reading, but I don't know if I'm pulling this one out in readings for others. This is one I've kind of just reserved for myself or close friends when I'm kind of feeling this energy. I love her dress, and the clothing choices in this deck. It's just amazing. And the detail and the blanket here, I really enjoyed this deck. But as far as the versatility, I feel like it's a bit of a neutral face for versatility, and a score of 52. So for energy and personal connection, I really have made a connection with this deck. I feel like, a bit of a bond with the character in this deck. We follow her kind of story. And I think the energy is fantastic. So I'm going to give this the party face for energy and personal connection and a score of 97. So for readability, it's actually really interesting because the titles are really clear. The suit names have stayed the same. The quartz have stayed the same. So in that aspect, it's really high on the readability scale. When we get to the guidebook, it's kind of interesting because the guidebook was obviously translated from a different language into English, and not very well. But because of the energy of this deck, and because we're looking at this child, this young child, the way that it's written almost feels like the voice of a young child who, you know, hasn't quite grasped the English language to the level of an adult. So the readability is actually pretty fun when you bring in the guidebook to kind of see how it's going to be worded and how the voice of this child might kind of come in that form. So I really enjoy its readability. So I'm going to give it the party face for readability, and I'm going to give it a score of 89. So for uniqueness, I think this deck is really unique. I think it stands alone. I know that there are other decks that are kind of coming from that kind of child perspective. But I feel like the way that this deck is kind of following the one storyline of this one child and the kind of the anime style of the deck, I think makes it really unique. So I am going to give it the party face for uniqueness, and I'm going to give it a score of 94. That gives the Ari Tarot a total of 421 points and puts it in 4th place on the list so far. The last deck for this video is the Chubby Bunny Tarot. I got this back in June, the same time as I got the last one, the Ari Tarot, from Teveda's website, and I paid $62, and then this deck just disappeared and it's even difficult to find like a search for it because there's a more popular deck called Chubby Bunny out there. So if you are interested in this deck, I would I put a link in the description for Teveda's website and this specific listing, so you can send him a message and ask him if it's going to be available. But they tend to have things go away and then they'll pop back up. So I have a feeling like this one's going to be back at some point, but it has this really, here are the backs, this really gentle kind of feel to it. Let's have a look at card usability and see how it shuffles. The cards are actually really thin. So to get a good ripple, you got to really slow it down so they have time to kind of drop in there. But the shuffle's pretty good. And I don't know about, durability isn't, one of the criteria, but I don't know how without kind of gentleness, these cards would hold up because they are quite thin. But for card usability, I think for this one, I'm going to have to give it the neutral face because it shuffles really well, but I have to be really gentle with it. Because the cards get a little bit delicate. So we're going to give it the neutral face and a score of 47. So for versatility, I think this deck is pretty versatile. I guess I tend to pull it in around the spring, when I got it April, I got it in June, so June, July, and then, I suppose it has kind of like an Easter feel to it. It does remind me of those kind of old, greeting cards. I have some, in my baby book, there's some cards that, look like this. I can't quite put my finger on exactly its vibe, but definitely brings me back to kind of a time. I feel like maybe it's kind of like the 80s, like a 1980s greeting card. I love the combination where some of these figures are very cartoony and some look a little bit different, and the rabbits that they've used I think is really really unique. But for versatility, I feel like it's just, I'm in the mood for this specific deck and I'm going to use it. I don't know that it has a lot of depth or really versatility in that way. So for versatility, I'm going to give it the unamused face and a score of 35. So for energy and personal connection, I think the energy of this deck is really good. It's really sweet. I have made a personal connection with this deck. I wish it was more readily available because I'm kind of shy about talking about it because it's not around. But the energy and personal connection is high, so I'm going to give the party face for that, and I'm going to give it a score of 93. So for readability, we have no guidebook with this one. It's just what's on the cards, but that is very clear. There's no name changes. So I'm going to give the smiling face for readability and a score of 62. So for uniqueness, I think this deck is really unique. I don't think there's anything that quite fills its space in my collection. I feel like the borders and everything that's going on and the kind of characters they've used and how they've pieced it all together is pretty unique. So it's going to get the party face for me for uniqueness, and it's going to get a score of 96. That gives the Chubby Bunny Tarot a total of 333 points and puts it at 32 on the list so far. That's it for the first part of my decks over $50 that I got in 2023. Join me in the next video for part 5.2, where I finish that list of decks over $50. And then we head to the next video with all the decks over $70. And that's it. And then we'll have the final results. It's so exciting. So 2 videos left, and thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and I'm so glad you're enjoying it, and see you again soon. Before we go, here is the final list. So far, we've had so many shakeups in this video in the top deck, so here is the top 14 as it stands right now.